Matt Miguez has plenty on his mind, and he's ready to share it with the world. It's time to hear the Miguez Mindset.
Welcome into another episode of the Miguez Mindset here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles. Matt Miguez here. College football season is finally here. Those 8 long months in between games is finally over. We've made it. And we're talking about the LSU Tigers as they get set to open their 2024 season in Sin City. It is the Modelo Las Vegas Classic between the 13th ranked LSU Tigers and the 23rd ranked USC Trojans. Joining me here on the Miguez Mindset to talk about the Trojans is Marc Kulkin. He is the host of Locked On USC. Marc, really appreciate you taking the time. Good morning. How are you?
I'm great, Matt. I appreciate you having me on the show. I'm looking forward to this.
So I want to start looking at USC from last season. 8-5 under Lincoln Riley. Obviously, you had Caleb Williams at quarterback, the number 1 overall pick to the Chicago Bears. But and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe a little ignorant of me, but I'm not locked into USC like you are. 8-5 had to be a little bit of a disappointment, considering Caleb Williams at quarterback, Lincoln Riley as your head coach. Talk to me about last season for the Trojans.
I think you're probably being polite when you say it was a little bit of a disappointment. It was, look, I'm willing to admit it, and I think Lincoln Riley would admit it well. It was a disaster. When you take over a program the year before and you kind of tease the fan base, hey, you know what? I understand you guys won 4 games in 2021, but we're going to win 11 games in 2022, and we're going to take you to the precipice of going to the playoffs. All of a sudden, you can't bring back Caleb Williams the following season and all those returners and collapse to 8-5. And we know where that happened. That was on the other side of the ball. You're not going to win shootouts. You can't do that. And to say that last year was a disappointment, yeah, it definitely a major understatement. There's no other way to say it.
Especially, when you look at how the season went. I mean, the Trojans jumped out to a 6-0 record and then lost 5 of their last 6 games. I mean, that is just, from your perspective, obviously being locked into the program, when did things shift? I mean, obviously you dropped that game to Notre Dame, but then it kind of just avalanched after that.
So it actually started to shift before the Notre Dame game. You can go back a couple games where you started to notice that this team lacked a certain type of identity. It seemed to be all Caleb Williams all the time and nothing else. Everybody's going to focus on the defense, and for a good reason. But when you abandon a running game that's working for you, and I go back to the Utah game last year, USC ran the ball with success. Utah could not stop them in the first quarter. They finished the first quarter with 100 yards rushing. They did not run the ball one more time in the first half. It's that type of stuff that kind of, it starts the snowball effect. You talked about losing, 5 of their last 6 to end the season. They almost lost all 6. They had to escape Berkeley with a 50-49 victory. When you're scoring 50 points, you shouldn't be holding on
Right.
to win. USC lost at home 52 to, I can't remember. I think they put up 42 points against Washington. That's when everything just completely caved in. Caleb Williams realized, you know what? We're not going to the playoffs. We're not going to the conference championship game. And then that's when you saw him in the stands getting that consolation, hug from his mom. That's when it broke down for him. I think the pressure, it just, as each game went on, and they weren't winning the way they should be in the beginning of the season when they were 6-0, that pressure was just too much to overcome. They literally escaped 2022 defensively because they were creating turnovers. That didn't happen last year. And when you can't create turnovers and you can't tackle and you can't be in a position to make a tackle, you're going to look like a JV team on one side of the ball.
Now, Marc, talk about this offseason. Obviously, Caleb Williams departs. He's the number 1 overall pick in this past NFL draft. Miller Moss going to be the starting quarterback. Just kind of talk about the way the offseason's gone, the chemistry between Moss and his receivers, the coaching staff, things like that.
Sure. So Miller Moss and the wide receivers, the four that everybody should focus on, they're sophomores. They were getting most of the second team reps during practice last year. So there's already a synergy between these two, between Miller Moss and the wide receiver group. That chemistry is there. And this is a very, very talented group, albeit young. I understand that. People look, well, where are their stats? Well, just like LSU lost Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors to the NFL, USC lost Taj Washington and Brendan Rice to the NFL. Those were your major producers there. During the offseason, Lincoln Riley and the coaching staff says, we need to get bigger. We're going to the big conference. We're going to focus on getting our guys bigger on both sides of the ball. So that started the moment the Holiday Bowl victory ended. They hit the weight room. Since spring camp, heading into fall camp, Coach Riley made a mention of this. The team added an extra 1,400 pounds in the weight room. Exactly. So we're hoping that added size, a new scheme, new culture, everything, all those new ingredients, the new players that have come along, that's going to be able to make a big enough difference heading into this game.
Yeah, the Big Ten. I mean, what a conference that has become. It was already a solid conference with Ohio State and Michigan and so on and so forth. But now you add Oregon and USC and Washington, and that I mean, how are the same teams going to play for a conference championship every year? I mean, you're going to have different teams in the conference championship game year after year.
And here's something I'll ask. Let me ask you this, Matt. What do you think about? Imagine you're 10-2. Okay, because I don't think going undefeated is going to be the norm. It never is the normal, but the way these conferences are set up now, they become more difficult. The SEC added Oklahoma and Texas. You mentioned the programs that are joining the big conference. I appreciate you not mentioning UCLA. I don't like to mention them either. But what my point I'm getting to is, let's say you go 10-2 throughout the regular season. Do you want to play in that conference championship game?
No.
Right. You're already in the playoffs if you're 10-2 coming out of the
No.
So that's where I'm at with that. Yeah, it looks good. You're playing in the conference championship. You get that extra game. You get more time to sell your program, so to speak. But if I'm USC and I'm 10-2 and I've beaten Michigan, I've beaten LSU, I might have tripped up against Michigan and one other game in the big conference. That that Big Ten conference championship game, I'm thinking, I don't need to be there. Put me in the playoffs.
That's a fair point. Marc Kulkin joining us here on the Miguez Mindset. Now, Marc, let's look at this matchup. Obviously, week one, these two teams haven't played anybody other than themselves in 8 months. What's kind of the expectation? Obviously, there's going to be some rust with both teams. There's going to be some slow starts with both teams. But we do know on paper that both of these teams are capable of putting up points and putting up points in a big way. So what's kind of the early expectation for this matchup?
So this game is going to come down to which defense improved the most during this offseason. Both replaced their defensive coordinators. I think USC was probably more aggressive in the transfer portal, trying to bring in more talent. So I think that's the chess match. Is LSU's new defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, going to be able to take the pieces that he has and incorporate it into his scheme? And on the other side, is Dan Lynn going to be able to take all those new pieces and incorporate them with the pieces he already inherited at USC? Which one's going to work the best? I see it this way. LSU's offensive line, they have the advantage until USC can show they know how to stop the run. Will Campbell said it. We're coming out there for a fist fight. We're going to run the ball. If USC cannot force LSU to run the ball outside of the tackles, it's going to be a long day for USC on defense.
Yeah, LSU is going to slowly get back to that LSU of old, right?
Right.
Joe Burrow and Jane Daniels kind of created a shift to where LSU was more of a passing offense. But when you think of LSU football, it is ground and pound and beat you up the middle.
Right.
And it looks like Brian Kelly's going to get back to that here in 2024. You talked a little bit about the USC offense with Miller Moss and some of his new receivers. Defense, like you mentioned, obviously a big question mark. Talk to me about some of these key pieces that they've brought in, and what's kind of the expectation for the defense.
So the key pieces they brought in was they needed to get more defensive interior help up front. They didn't get the guys they first targeted in the transfer portal. However, they did find Gavin Meyer, who transferred in from Wyoming. USC's had a lot of success with the Wyoming pipeline. They've got their starting left guard, Emmanuel Preyon. Last year, Solomon Byrd was drafted over into the Houston Texans program. And now they found Gavin Meyer, who's going to possibly start next to Bear Alexander or in front of Bear Alexander. The depth chart was just released last night, and it was Bear Alexander or Gavin Meyer. There's another transfer that USC brought in during the winter that took part in spring camp, Nate Clifton. He played at Vanderbilt. At the second level, linebacker, they brought in Easton Mascarenas Arnold from Oregon State, tackling machine, all conference selection. And then they also brought in two guys they brought in more than two guys, but two safeties that are going to play in the middle. Another all conference selection, Achille Arnold. Yes, he is Easton Mascarenas' half brother. Both played at Oregon State. Kamari Ramsey, really good free safety, played at UCLA in Danton Wynn system. When you're strong up the middle, that's how you start a really good defense. And that's where I think USC is really focused, from the middle to the outside. And then you've got John Humphrey also at cornerback that they brought in.
Bear Alexander, first of all, that is an incredible name. And secondly, he is just a ferocious human being.
Yes.
LSU is going to have their hands full trying to slow him down on Sunday night, right?
So where I see this is in the trenches. You've got Will Campbell, you've got Emory Jones on your bookends for LSU. They're big across the board. You hate to say their weakest link. It might be their center, redshirt freshman DJ Chester. He's got some experience, but has he played in a game with this type of atmosphere? Sold out, two marquee programs, both programs trying to show that, hey, last year was an anomaly. Bear Alexander, if USC's defense in the middle can cause some havoc, confuse him, that could help USC's defense. USC's strength on that side of the ball, it's their secondary. There's no question about it. USC has to stop the run. I'm going to keep coming back to that. So if Will Campbell and Emory Jones are handling the edge, if USC's not creating pressure on the outside, Garrett Nussmeier is going to be able to sit back there for 3, 4, 5 seconds and have his way. I don't care how good USC secondary is. USC has to find a way to get into that backfield and create pressure. Move Nussmeier off the spot. They can't do that. It'll be a long day. So
you've hit on two of them. Stop the run, put pressure on the quarterback. What is the third key to victory for the Trojans?
They have to be able to run the ball on offense, and Miller Moss has to look. He doesn't have to play at the exact level that he played in the Holiday Bowl, where he just looked like another Heisman in waiting for Lincoln Riley. In his first start, he rolled out against Louisville, considered a top 30 defense with NFL-level secondary guys. What do you go? 6 touchdowns, 370 yards, and he was using those 4 freshman wide receivers at the time to kind of build that momentum coming into the season. If USC can be balanced on offense, run the ball, I think they need to get at least 150 yards on the ground. Miller Moss is going to use those weapons he has on the outside. He doesn't need to do the heavy lifting. He needs to run an offense the way Lincoln Riley calls it. Don't go off schedule. Don't pretend you're Caleb Williams. Don't change the play. Don't have your offensive lineman sitting in that 3-point stance for 20 seconds.
Right.
Get the play, fire off, make LSU adjust.
Analysts always hate this question. I love asking it, but I hate when it is asked to me. Marc, give me a prediction for Sunday night's game.
This is one of those betting lines that you just look at and you're like, well, why do I want to touch it? I mean, it started LSU minus 6.5. It's dropped down to 4.5. I haven't checked the books to see if it's dropped any further or if it's gone back up. I'm not touching that line. If I'm betting, I'm looking at the over-under, because 4.5 is like, it's a pick 'em to me.
Yeah.
It's what? The over-under is 63.5, I believe.
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah, this is one of those games. It's the first game out of the box. Both defenses are trying to figure out, are we good? There's going to be mistakes in this game. For me, it's a red zone battle. Whichever defense can step up and force field goals instead of allowing touchdowns is going to win this game. With that said, I see it going over. I see, again, I guess pull out the homer pick here. I'm gonna go USC 37, LSU 33, somewhere in that range there.
Yeah, currently, according to ESPN Bet, LSU is -4, and the
Oh,
over-under is 64.5.
it's going up.
So
So
37-33 would have you hitting the over. That's actually a safe play. I would probably agree with you. Like I said off the top, these offenses are both capable of scoring points in large numbers. So looking forward to a great game Sunday night over in Las Vegas. Marc Kulkin, host of Locked On USC, joining us here on the Miguez Mindset. Marc, before I let you run, if any of our listeners are interested in USC content, tell them where they can find it.
absolutely. So Locked On USC, at least 5 times a week, you can find that show on YouTube every day. When I'm not on Locked On USC, you can also find me doing my writing content at wearesc.com, part of the On3 network. And we also host a weekly show called Inside the Trojan Huddle. It's about an hour and a half long panel show where we break down everything. So it's hard not to find me.
Right. Marc Kulkin, really appreciate you taking the time, man. Enjoy the weekend in Vegas. Enjoy the game Sunday night. And we'll talk to you down the line.
Thanks for having me on, Matt. I look forward to doing this again.